So let's record. Okay, so you might hear a warning message saying that recording is in progress. Hello, David. Sit anywhere you want. I don't think you have to. If you want, you can just sit over here in the velvet if you want. So good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to be learning for all of the weeknights of the 3 weeks. At the moment, the schedule is to do it at 7:30 so that all of those who watch Jeopardy can see Final Jeopardy and then tune into me. But we'll see. This week, Mincha is at 8:05, so there's no problem doing 20 minutes, a half an hour. Next week, Mincha this week is 8:10, next week is 8:05, the following week is 8 o'clock. So I think we're going to be able to do it, but the third week, if we're behind on finishing the text of Eicha, so we might go back a little bit and push back to 7:15 or 7 o'clock, but only if we're behind. If we're doing roughly 8 psukim a night, not including tonight, because tonight I'm going to introduce Eicha, and then we're going to do a few psukim, but we'll run out of time because Tainus Mincha is coming at 7:55. But if everything works well, I have it kind of arranged, then we'll be able to do all of Eicha in 3 weeks. And not only that, but all of Eicha in the 3 weeks, which I find very exciting. I brought this idea to Rabbi Tokeir and Rabbi Schiffman because it occurred to me that we all hear Eicha on Tisha B'Av night, but very rarely do any of us learn Eicha inside. We just listen to the Megillah and in kind of are caught up in the experience of sitting on the floor and finding somewhere to sit and getting comfortable and listening to whichever guy is doing that perek. But we don't always know exactly what the words mean, what the message of the book is, what the message of each perek is, and how it all kind of flows together. So that's what we're hoping to do. A lot of it will be straight shot in the psukim, certainly after tonight. But the first night or two, we might do a little bit more of a holistic sort of introduction to Eicha. So to understand what we're dealing with here, first and foremost, like Rabbi Beryl Wine likes to say, the Tanakh is not a history book. It does not give a straight chronology of events and famous people and leave it at that as a kind of retelling of what occurred. It's theological. It's a work of religious faith. It's a work of, according to the Jewish tradition, that is divinely inspired, if not entirely divinely written through the Nevi'im that copied it down. So Tanakh is always trying to teach us some kind of moral lesson and spiritual lesson, as well as a history lesson. So Eicha itself is not a narrative of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, the destruction of the first temple, which is when Eicha was written. The destruction of the first temple is 586 before the Common Era. So that would be some 2,500, 2,600 years ago. Eicha is not a straightforward history. Not only that, it doesn't even tell the whole story or most of the story of the Churban Beis HaMikdash itself. There are 3 books of Tanakh that intersect to let us know what happened when the temple was destroyed. They are the book of Malachim, particularly Malachim Beis, the second part of the book of Kings, which tells the entire story from Shlomo HaMelech all the way until the Churban Beis HaMikdash during the days of Tzidkiyahu, the last of the kings of the house of David. Along with Malachim, there's the book of Yirmiyah, the book of Jeremiah, from which the word Jeremiad comes, which means a very sad narrative of tragedy and suffering. There's a reason that it's named after him. Yirmiyahu is not the Navi where funny things happen. Look to other books of Shoftim for some of that. For Yirmiyahu, it's tragedy, basically unrelenting. He was a Navi before the Churban, during the Churban, and then afterwards. And it's an interesting book that ends almost all of a sudden, practically feeling like it's in the middle of the story. And the third book is the book of Eicha, which is what we're going to learn now. So let's look at the 3 books separately and then see where Eicha fits into kind of the picture. It's 7:32, so we're still okay on time. I'm not behind yet, but I will be soon. So Malachim covers a time period of about 400 years, starting from Shlomo HaMelech, who takes over at the end of King David's life. David HaMelech is still alive in the first perek of Malachim, giving Shlomo advice, basically telling him to take care of family business, to kill Yoav and Shimi ben Gera and remove any threats to the throne. Shlomo then builds the Beis HaMikdash, the great marvel of the ancient world that we know of from the Mishnah that had miracles happening on a daily basis, if not every couple of hours, that had the Kohanim serving in the most magnificent building the ancient world had to offer. Astonishingly, the building was only approximately the size of a Brooklyn house, basically 100 feet by 40 feet or 100 feet by 20 feet. It's really not a very large building. Much smaller. It was about the third of the size of a football field. The second Beis HaMikdash dwarfed it and included that area. The third Beis HaMikdash, allegedly, we don't know, but it's going to be even bigger than that. But the first Beis HaMikdash was Shlomo's great, incredible accomplishment. And by the time you get to Perek Ches, Perek Tes, Perek Yud of the Sefer Malachim, what you are encountering is the high water mark of the Jewish people pretty much throughout history. Look at this. Oh my God, I got guys showing up. This is so exciting. I have a couple of people live. I have a bunch of people on Zoom. I'm super excited about this. Sorry, I'll try to contain my enjoyment because we're talking about Eicha. We're supposed to be sad. The second Beis HaMikdash, the first Beis HaMikdash is pretty much the high point, because then in Perek Yud Aleph of Malachim, Shlomo is accused of, at least literally in the text, of worshiping Avodah Zarah, certainly allowing his many wives from many other nations to put up temples for Avodah Zarah and serve Avodah Zarah. And then his son Rechavam takes over and the kingdom is split. And we talked about this on Shavuos in our discussion of Yeravam ben Nevat. The kingdom is split for the remainder of the time of the Beis HaMikdash until the 10 tribes are going to be exiled. Several hundred years of 80% of the Jewish people not coming to the Beis HaMikdash, not being affiliated with the Beis HaMikdash, having armed guards at the borders saying that only cars with yellow license plates can get in. Sorry. A two-state solution is what has happened in the land of Israel, and it's not good. The 10 tribes are a real illegitimate kingdom. Yeravam was supposed to be a temporary phenomenon, but he insisted on holding on to power and erecting 2 giant golden calves for the Jews to worship, because that's in our DNA. We love a nice golden calf now and then, to the point where Rov Klal Yisrael doesn't do Aliyas HaRegel, doesn't go to the Beis HaMikdash. If you think that for the last 2,000 years, we who have never seen it have been mourning the Beis HaMikdash every Tisha B'Av, and those who had it didn't bother to go, you begin to realize what a tragic story we have bred for ourselves over Jewish history. I put a little piece on that into the Haggadah Companion that they put out this past year, because it just struck me as just so odd to think of 80% of the Jewish people not bringing a Korban Pesach when they had the chance to do so. Hanging over the rest of the book of Malachim, from the schism and on, is the specter, is the fear, is the fate of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. It's like going to see the movie Titanic, lahavdil. You know the ending before you even go in. It's just a question of how you get there. The Churban Beis HaMikdash is an inevitability. Shlomo HaMelech had been warned that there would be Churbans someday, not just 1, but 2. And in fact, there's a weeping when Yosef and Binyamin are meeting each other, when Yosef is viceroy of Egypt, over the fate of the Beis HaMikdash even then. So there was pre-knowledge among those with prophetic powers that the Churban was going to come. But in Malachim, what we see is that the Churban takes place over stages, and there's no quiz at the end of the Zoom on this. But if you start, the split of the kingdoms is in 930 before the Common Era. So that's when Yeravam's sinful reign begins. Over the next couple of hundred years, an empire called Ashur begins to rise, the Assyrian Empire, the power to the north of the land of Israel, while Egypt is always the power to the south. In the year 722 before the Common Era, so 200 or so years after the split, that's when the 10 tribes are exiled by Ashur, by Assyria. So the 10 tribes, 2 tribes division lasts for 200 years, almost 210, before the 10 tribes are exiled forevermore across the river Sambatyon, never to be seen again. In the year 720 or so, after the 10 tribes are exiled, the prophet Micha in Trei Asar warns the kingdom of Yehuda, if you're not careful, if you keep doing Avodah Zarah, if you keep following the evil ways of the 10 tribes, then your fate will be the same as theirs, and you will be exiled, and the temple will be destroyed. And the Jews of Yehuda said, nah, it's God's special city. It's God's protected temple. It's his house on the earth. He would never allow it to be destroyed. And over the next couple of years and decades, they think that they're righter than ever. Sancherev of Assyria makes war on Yehuda and besieges Yerushalayim in the year 701 before the Common Era. But by a miracle, God gets rid of Sancherev's entire army. And the Jews of Yehuda and Jerusalem say, see, God protects us. We will never be destroyed. We'll be here forever. 100 years later or so, in 609 before the Common Era, the last righteous king of Yehuda takes office. He took office, some years before then, but 609 is the end of him. His name is Yoshiyahu, and Yoshiyahu Amelech, is a tremendously righteous king who is slain in battle with the Pharaoh of Egypt and is turned into target practice by his armies. We will say a kinna about him on Tisha B'Av morning, unless we're fortunate enough that maybe the Beis HaMikdash comes before then. The death of Yoshiyahu is the death knell of everything. He's replaced by his son Yechaniah, who rules for 3 months. He is replaced, I jumped a king. He is replaced by Yehoiakim, who launches a rebellion against the new empire of Babylon. Yehoiakim is deposed and replaced by his son Yechaniah, and eventually the last king of the Jews, Tzidkiyahu, is in place. So it's a churban in stages. The split of the kingdom is the beginning of the problem. You could even go back further and say Solomon's wives are the beginning of the problem. 200 years later, the 10 tribes are exiled. 100 years after that, Yoshiyahu is killed. At every step of the way, the prophets warn the people, straighten up and fly right, or there will be a churban. But each time the people say, it's going to be fine, we'll be okay. And then in very dispassionate prose at the end of Sefer Malachim, Parach Chaf Hey, the churban comes, the temple is destroyed, the Babylonians ride off with all of the gold and silver vessels, and the Jews are exiled, never to come home again until 70 years later, when fortunately we're allowed to come home again. That's Malachim, the history of the churban. Yirmiyahu is a personal eye view of an eyewitness to churban. The prophet Jeremiah, who lives through all of these events, or at least the last 50 years or so of them, who is a Kohen, who lives in Anasos, a community close to Jerusalem, so he can do the avodah. Am I not coming through? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I got some heads shaking. I got nervous. Maybe I wasn't hearable. Some of you could probably hear me from your house just by how loud I am here in the Kingsway Auditorium. So there you go. Yirmiyahu includes not just history, but also nevuah, prophecy from Yirmiyah of what would happen and how it would happen. And so the book of Malachim is supplemented by the book of Yirmiyah, which gives a personal view of what happened. And then there's the book of Eicha, which is what we're going to concentrate on over the next 3 weeks, 15 weeknights. Hopefully we'll do the best we can. The book of Eicha is not a narrative. The book of Eicha is pure emotion. If you look at it just on the surface, it's like there's no structure to it. It's just a visceral reaction to the tragedy and suffering of the churban. It is full of human emotion and regret and pain and suffering in a way that Tanakh usually doesn't go, which makes it fairly unique. One thing that we like to say is that everything's in Tanakh, everything's in scripture. It turns out even human emotion and guilt and anger and fear and even anger at God are in Tanakh. They're here in the book of Eicha, which makes it something really worthwhile to study. I think Rabbi Schiffman could have a field day and do 3 years and not just the 3 weeks we're going to do. But it's sort of amazing. It's an emotional response to the terrible destruction that is happening. The Gemara Moed Katan tells us that Yirmiyah actually wrote most of it before the churban and gave it in a scroll to King Yehoiakim in Jerusalem. And when Yehoiakim started reading it and read about how Jerusalem would be in mourning and there would be no kings and there would be exile, destruction, and suffering, King Yehoiakim took a knife, cut the scroll into ribbons, and then burned each piece by itself, the Gemara tells us. In fact, Yirmiyah himself tells us this story in Sefer Yirmiyah. Yehoiakim wanted to deny the truth, but he couldn't because it was coming anyway. And so the final version of Eicha is the reconstituted scroll that Yirmiyah put back together with additional details after Yehoiakim burned the original. What is the main theme of Eicha? There's a number of different ones. Obviously, it's about destruction and suffering. Most of us think of the Churban as being somewhat, if not completely, our own fault. We were told not to do Averos. We did them. The Tochacha in Sefer Dvarim in Kisavo says, if you don't follow my ways, this, and this will all happen. And if you read Eicha, those are exactly the things that happen. Women consuming their children, the innocent suffering. There's no question that we bear a ton of guilt for this. But that's not what the Megillah is called. It's not called the guilt Megillah. It's called Eicha. And the word Eicha itself literally means how or why. Not even with an object or a subject to it. Literally, why? How could this happen? That's what the book of Eicha's title means. Rav Soloveitchik explains, there are some kinds of questions that we're ordinarily not allowed to ask, such as, God, why did you do something? God, how could this happen? Except the book of Eicha and Tisha B'Av, we're allowed to ask those questions. Among the questions that we're asking, why? Yerushalayim is the holy city under God's special protection. How could he destroy it? And how could he destroy it at the hands of cruel, wicked, bloodthirsty, vicious people of low moral character who don't even believe in God? Now that's asking God why he chose to do something. That's not something we ordinarily do. But in Eicha and on Tisha B'Av, we're permitted to ask that question. We then have another question that's at the heart of it. There's a wonderful book called Lamentations by Yael Ziegler, who is a doctor and a professor in Eretz Yisrael, presumably not a rabbi, as an Orthodox woman. But Dr. Ziegler says that another point is, we're asking, how is it that innocent children, women, and non-sinners could be punished for the wickedness of previous generations that led up to the Churban, which is a very global question. How can innocent people suffer? Why do Risha'im prosper? That's at the core of every religious grappling of faith that any religious person has. Why isn't evil punished? Why is innocence done with wickedness? That's something that's hard. How is that just? If HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a just and righteous God, why would he look at the room of shoes in Yad Vashem? 1.5 million children under the age of 12 exterminated in the Holocaust. How could God allow that to happen if God is tzedek and mishpat, as we say every davening, let alone on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Did Klal Yisrael deserve these punishments? Well, we started already with the idea that we were sinful, but did we deserve punishments that extensive? At some points in Eicha, we'll see in the Psukim, God is even portrayed, lo aleinu, but as an enemy of Klal Yisrael. Are we allowed to say that? Eicha is the one place where we're allowed to speak such heretical phrasing. What about the special relationship? What about all the promises God made to us? So these are very central questions in Eicha. And the first thing to understand, says Rav Soloveitchik, is that on Tisha B'Av, we are allowed to ask those questions. No other time of year, no other context, but on Tisha B'Av, yes. How do we know that? Because Yirmiyah did it. By writing the book of Eicha, Yirmiyah is showing us the idea that man can question God about why certain things happen. We may not get an answer. We may not get the answer we like. As Rabbi Schiffman said in one of his speeches over the last 2 days, no is also an answer. And sometimes that's not the answer that we want to get. But we're allowed to ask the question. We're allowed to ask why. And not only that, but other people did the same thing. Avraham Avinu, when God told him he was going to destroy Sodom, Avraham said, how can it be that Hashofet Kol Haaretz Lo Ya'aseh Mishpat, that the judge of the world, God, would not do justice for the righteous people in Sodom if there were any? That's pretty chutzpahdik to say that to God. Moshe does the same thing. When God sends Moshe in Egypt and things get worse for the Jews, Moshe says, Lama harayosa, lama hazeh, lama zeh shalachtani. Why did you do evil to the Jewish people by making things worse? Why did you send me if it's just going to make Paro even more cruel and vindictive? Eov asks questions. Yeshaya Hanavi asks questions. Kavakuk Hanavi asks questions. Our forebears are showing us that we're allowed to ask, as long as we hold to one core belief, that God truly is a righteous judge, that God is tzedek u'mishpat, and that we just need to understand why God took certain actions. The core of the faith has to remain, because if what you say is, how could God be good if God punishes the innocent, then you're one step away from heresy and saying, well, God isn't good, or there is no God, or whatever apicorsis you would like to state. Somewhere on the internet, no doubt, it is out there in a discussion board. What Eicha is meant to do is to confirm our faith, even as we ask questions of God to try to understand. In a manner of speaking, it might be a test of our own beliefs. I mentioned to Rabbi Schiffman this morning in his Pirkei Avos Shir, Elisha ben Avuya, who is the great sage known as Acher, who went up with 3 other sages behind the Pargo to Shamayim and heard an angel state, all can come into the world to come, except Elisha ben Avuya. And that shattered his faith. That made it impossible for him to have faith anymore. He couldn't withstand that test of, can I still get in if I hear a voice say that I can't? Well, here's Eicha, where God is punishing, and yet we still continue to believe in the goodness and justice and the axioms of God's relationship with the Jewish people. Now, as far as the structure of the Sefer goes, it seems very random. There's a variety of emotions being expressed. I mentioned that's really, it doesn't happen elsewhere in Tanakh, but nevertheless, it's nice to see human emotion also plays a role in Holy Scripture. No part of human experience is left out of the Kisvei HaKodesh. I firmly believe that. But the structure does exist. 4 out of the 5 chapters of Eicha, as we'll see, go in the order of alphabetical acrostic. They go with the Aleph base. 22 psukim each parak, starting with Aleph, ending with Taf, except for the 3rd parak, which is 66 psukim. So there's 3 Alephs and 3 bases going all the way to Taf. Only the 5th parak, the last parak, which is a number of different things that comfort us at the end, hopefully we'll get there by Tisha B'Av, that one's not written alphabetically. The structure of the prakim themselves, and we've only got about 2 minutes left, so we're going to wrap it up, but Parak 1 and 5, Parak Aleph and Hey, are very much about our guilt and our responsibility to help bring on the tragedy. The inner Parakim, Beis and Dalet, 2 and 4, are almost just outrage and anger and a protest against Hashem for wielding his anger against innocents who suffer tremendously in the Korban. The center of Eicha, the longest parak, 66 psukim, is parak Gimel. That, the parak about the Gever, about the individual, reaches, Dr. Ziegler says, the heart of the human experience and expresses hope and faith in Hashem's enduring compassion. There's not one narrator like many books of Tanakh. It's multiple perspectives. Some of it is written in first person by Yerushalayim as she suffers, seen as a woman. Some is written in third person by a narrator, like much of Tanakh is. And some of it, like Parak Gimel, is written through the point of view of the individual man, the individual Gever. And there's a lot of despair that's expressed and contrasted through these different perspectives. But ultimately, and we'll end here, ultimately the core of Eicha is the unshakable faith in God's justice, in God's goodness, and in God's promise to the Jewish people. So hopefully that'll come clear as we learn over the next 3 weeks. We're going to go generally from 7:30 to 8. Tonight we went from 7:30 to 7:52 because of the exigencies of Mincha. We haven't done any actual psukim yet, but we'll get inside and start delving tomorrow. Hopefully approximately 8 psukim a night, and we'll make it to the very end, except Parak Gimel, which has short psukim. So thank you guys so much for coming. Thank everybody for being here. Wow, 27 people on Zoom. Holy moly. I'm going to put these recordings up on YouTube as well. I'll put the link in the link came out this afternoon in the email from Kingsway, but it'll also be in the WhatsApp group for KJC Shiurim. So if anybody is unable to come at 7:30, it's a rough time of day for some people. If you do want to continue to keep up with the shiur, every night, about an hour and a half later, I'll stick it up on YouTube. So thank you so much, and easy rest of the fast and a good 3 weeks. And I'm very much looking forward to this. I hope you are too.